think for most of the anime films that have come out last year in 2025, a lot of people, especially in the anime community, do not like this film. And I'm not saying it because I don't like this movie, but a lot of people really just don't like this movie in general. And I can kind of understand why based on the fact that I actually have seen this movie recently. But we're going to touch upon what I think about it, but right now we're just going to talk a little bit more so about what everybody else thinks about it. Now, obviously, a lot of people do not like this movie for a lot of other different reasons that I can list, but more so the fact that a lot of people just don't like this movie because of the fact that a lot of people just seem to really respect the director that worked on this movie, and that is Mamoru Hosoda. Now, Hosoda has worked on a lot of movies over the years, more so that a lot of them actually have been well regarded as like masterpieces, like The Girl Who Left in Time, Summer Wars, and Wolf Children, and of course Belle. Now, obviously, this guy is up there with Hayao Miyazaki, who actually is one of the most well-regarded directors in the anime industry. Obviously, he's up there for sure as one of those directors. He's made a lot of great movies over the years, and obviously the ones I've listed, like Summer Wars and A Girl Left in Time, is up there as one of his biggest masterpieces. Now, to some degree, when Scarlet came out and the reception came out for this movie, obviously a lot of people did not like this movie, and there's a lot of reasons why a lot of people don't like this movie. But obviously, for a lot of reasons, this movie has a lot of things that a lot of people seem to think that is much different from a lot of others' works. However, for most of his other films, who actually have done really well successfully and financially really well, Scarlet unfortunately was one of those movies that didn't exactly have the best reception from a lot of the people. And for myself, who actually was very curious about watching Scarlet when it first came out, when they decided to come up with it internationally, I decided to actually go see it for myself and thought, why not go check it out? And honestly, from after watching the movie, I actually sort of agree with a lot of people when they actually do not like this movie for what it is. Now, what is the essential plot of this movie? That's pretty much different from all the other of Soda's movies that we've seen over the years. Well, the premise of Scarlet goes like this. It's a medieval princess on a quest to revenge her father's death after he gets killed and executed. And pretty much it basically kind of consumes her enough that she would go on revenge to go up against her uncle, who's actually now the new king of the throne. And the whole entire movie, it basically centers on like her encountering a paramedic on the present day, and pretty much is in this little world where she ends up becoming part of this realm where it's between life and death. The entire movie basically centers upon like what it is to go on this whole big journey of her trying to figure out redemption, figuring out revenge, and etc. A lot of the things that pretty much this movie kind of serves. Now, on the surface, the plot can be a little bit straightforward and pretty easy to figure out, especially when it's not as complex as the way it sounds. However, in terms of how the movie is, I can tell you that it is pretty hard to understand, especially when I was with a group of friends that are big fans of anime, but the whole time we were watching the movie, it felt more like they were just completely like confused in what was going on. And in a way, I could sort of understand, and in a sense, like I actually do understand why a lot of people are very turned off by this movie. It doesn't exactly have a straightforward plot that a lot of people can understand very easily. And I feel like it's sort of like they want people to sort of understand it based on what it is by the film. But I feel like since the story isn't exactly as thorough and it's not as easy to understand, a lot of times it could be really hard to actually understand what's going on for most of the entire movie. And obviously the fact that they're in this little realm where it's life and death, the way it's set up, and in a sense it does have an interesting setup, but I feel like the setup needed to be a little bit more specific and actually more thorough instead of just, oh, they're in this world now. Oh, why in this world? Like, there isn't really a lot of answers or anything that's kind of shown them why she's in this world where it's life and death and how she's trying to get there. Because it felt more like it was just more like she was just trying to figure out her own sort of way how she dealt with her father's death, and that's about it. But in terms of the plot, I feel like they could have done a little bit better, where instead of just more so them just trying to go on this little journey where she's in this little realm, I feel like they could have just had it where it's more just she's going after her uncle and that's about it. And in a sense, from what I can tell based on the plot, it felt like it was just more like it was trying to preach more so the moral instead of like you just trying to figure it out for what the movie's trying to present. And that's sort of one of the biggest turnoffs I feel from why a lot of people don't like this movie, is maybe because of the fact that what the morals are and how it's sort of not exactly as specific enough that it's not from what it's supposed to be on screen. And I feel like that's kind of the biggest turnoff for a lot of people when it comes to most of Hosoda's movies. Because Hosoda has a good way of actually explaining each world and some of the morals and most of like what a lot of people can get from most of his movies. With Scarlet, it felt like, yes, they were trying to do more of like the medieval realm and almost like a Shakespearean kind of way. But in a sense, like it definitely felt like it was trying to jump from medieval to the real world to another realm where there's a bunch of villagers and everything else. It didn't seem like it was enough specific enough, and felt didn't exactly feel like it was a little more realistic enough. If anything, it felt like it was just jumping from place to place, and it didn't exactly feel like it was trying to be like in one world from another. It just felt like it jumped from the next thing to the next. If anything, it felt more distracting, and it felt more like it wasn't really trying to be something that it wasn't. As for the characters in the story, since we talked a little bit about the story a little bit, I think in terms of the characters, Scarlet, I definitely feel like there's actually something there for Scarlet, and you sort of understand why she's sort of in this world and some of the things that she's supposed to be doing and how she's dealing with. In terms of the paramedic, honestly, I definitely feel like the paramedic, they could have explained his backstory a little bit more, instead of like just trying to figure out like bits and pieces and why he's there. If anything, like when they first introduced him, they didn't exactly like become a little bit more thorough about why he's there until like later on in the movie. And in the sense, I kind of felt like they could have been a little bit more specific on why he's there anyway. But I guess that's kind of something that the movie kind of falls flat with, and some of the characters and kind of the world building, kind of the placements that they have him there. But in the sense, I definitely understand why Scarlet was there, and not so much the paramedic. And that goes with the other characters. If anything, the characters in this movie, they don't exactly serve anything to the plot. They don't exactly have any reason to be in the realm that they're in, or more so the journey that they're going in. If anything, the characters don't exactly deliver much to there. And I feel like that's kind of what bums me about this entire movie, is that the movie looks really good in terms of like what it is looks like in the animation and most of what the setup is. But I think that's kind of the other turnoff for a lot of people who really don't like about this movie, is mainly because of the fact that the characters just don't serve a lot of greatness to this movie. And in a sense, it actually makes it even more confusing on why a lot of these characters are in this movie, more so than what the average plot is. And that's something that, when I think about like Hosoda's last movie, like when I think about like Belle or Wolf Children or Summer Wars, those movies had really good characters to really follow in a lot of those movies. And in the sense that what Hosoda's really good at is really making the characters really well regarded in those environments. Like when I think of Wolf Children is a movie that pretty much is about a mom that pretty much takes care of two children that are basically part wolf and part human. For most of the entire movie, it's basically how they kind of sort of live in society and how society views them the way they are. And you sort of really identify and really relate to what happens in that movie. And that's kind of why a lot of people love Wolf Children, because it has some meaning to it. The plot is specific enough that you sort of really resonate with what happens in that entire movie. But Scarlet, a lot of people don't exactly have like anything that they could resonate with. It's more just a girl who's pretty much just trying to take revenge from what happened to her father. And in a sense, okay, the plot of that is interesting, and the setup for it can be something that could be, relatable to some people. But it's the way that in this movie does and that it delivers. It doesn't really exactly make it enough that people can sort of identify it and perhaps sort of relate to it. It's almost like it's just there and the message is there, but it's not exactly as thorough enough where she can somewhat learn from it. It's almost like it's preaching it than anything else. And that's one of the biggest downfall for me for this movie, is that when it comes to the moral of it, it's more preachy, and it's more just, they're just showing it more so than telling it, and basically kind of finding out like what's the lesson around it. Like, how does she redeem it? How does she sort of learn from the fact that her father's gone and how he got killed, and how does she forget someone? Like, it kind of just made it more so just, oh, let's just forgive someone, that's it. It doesn't exactly go as specific enough where there's like a reason behind it. And that's one of the things that really bummed out about this movie for me, is just basically the fact that the moral isn't all there, and the fact that it should be more specific enough for people to understand as you're watching the entire movie. But clearly in the case of this movie, it doesn't exactly go as full beyond than what it's supposed to be. Now I talked about the story and characters. What do I think about the animation? Now, I think the only thing that I will say that's really good about this movie is the animation. I know some people are really turned off with the animation, and again, a lot of people are really, really turned off by this movie in general. But to be quite honest with you, I think the only thing that I could say that's really good about this movie in a very positive way is obviously the animation. The animation in this movie is pretty good. The only thing I could say about this movie that I don't really exactly like in terms of animation, obviously because of the fact that it does get a little bit distracting in the fact that it switches from hand-drawn to CGI, and that's kind of something that you kind of noticed that with Belle, where it felt more like it was just more so a CGI film, more so than hand-drawn. Now, I'm not against anything about CGI movies, since we've been seeing that a lot with like Japan recently with a lot of their other movies. But honestly, the way I look at this kind of movie is that, especially from a lot of Hosoda's movies, you sort of kind of see that the movie should have been a little bit more hand-drawn than CGI. And I get that CGI can be really good in terms of like how the characters are animated and there's some scenes and how it can really turn out really good in the end. But honestly, when it comes to this kind of movie, like how it switches from two different styles, in my opinion, it definitely felt like it was a little more distracting. And they should have just stick with one style instead of trying to switch from the next. That's kind of something that I've always never really admired. But then again, that's just my opinion. I know some people kind of don't really like that, but that's just the way I look at it. But for most of the animation in this movie, I do think it's pretty solid. And I do admire it for what it is, despite the fact that, yeah, it does switch to CGI and everything, but the animation is still pretty good overall. Then I went through a brief synopsis of what I think about Scarlet, and based on the story and based on what I think about the movie. To be honest with you, I do think that Scarlet is probably one of its least favorite movies that I've seen from the director. To be honest with you, the way I look at from how Hosoda's movies are, I do think that Wolf Children, Summer Wars, and a lot of other movies he's done in the past, I do think are a lot superior and a lot better than what Scarlet is. Even though the movie can be good and based on the premise and basically what it is, it does sound like it could be interesting and it can be a really good movie if it was actually written properly and if it actually wasn't that confusing to follow. Because I feel like that's kind of why a lot of people didn't really seem to like it when it first came out, especially in Japan, and obviously a lot of people that are probably going to go see it internationally probably feel the same way. Because I do think that the anime community definitely does not like this movie based on the fact that of what things I've listed. They don't exactly like it for the story, they don't like it for the characters, and basically what the whole entirety movie of itself. And in a sense, I actually do agree with what their opinions are about this movie, mainly because of the fact that I've seen it myself, and I've seen what a lot of people kind of say about it, and I actually do agree with a lot of it. Especially from the fact that this movie could be better than what it is. And to be honest with you, I think Hosoda is a good director, but I definitely feel like he could have done a little bit better with this movie based on the way it was written and based on the whole entirety of this entire movie. Because the way I look at this movie, that on paper it has an interesting premise and it does have the moral there and it does have the characters there and everything. But unfortunately, the way the movie looks like and the way that it definitely is presented, you could tell he could have done a little bit better with it if he actually put a lot more time and maybe made the idea a little bit more expanded and perhaps made it a little bit more interesting, a little more specific. And that's kind of why a lot of people don't like this movie for what it is. And to be honest with you, the way I look at Hosoda as a director, even though he's a great director, he's up there with Miyazaki, he's up there with a lot of other directors out there that have made fantastic anime films over the years. But unfortunately, like most directors, sometimes they'll have movies that aren't exactly their best when it comes to their based on their track record. And in a sense, I definitely felt like Scarlet was one of those movies where it wasn't exactly one of his greatest works that I've ever seen from him. I do think that other movies that he's made in the past are a lot better, but that's just me. Overall, that's kind of my review on Scarlet. I'd really like to know what you guys think about this movie and what you guys think of this review. Thank you guys for watching this review, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Thank you guys for watching. Take care.